I wish I was a cabin boy aboard a man of war. Sam's gone away aboard a man of war. Pretty work, brave boys, pretty work, I say. Sam's gone away aboard a man of war.
Hi, I'm Samuel Siegel, Executive Director of the Schooner Pursuit Historical Society, and welcome back to Privateer Timeline of the Revolutionary War, Part 6. Today we will be discussing July of 1782 through the end of the war in January 1784. Now let's get to it. July 2nd, 1782. The privateer vessel Active and a whaleboat took the Loyalist vessel Skipjack and tender to Admiral Arbuthnot's flagship. Captain Hyler set the prize afire after she had run aground to avoid recapture. Hyler and his men narrowly escaped in full view of the British Navy. November 5th, 1782. British Captain Asgill, who was chosen to stand in as collateral in place of Captain Lippincott for the murder of Captain Huddy, was released, thus ending the Huddy-Asgill affair. November 30th, 1782. The Battle of Kedges Strait. Colonial American militia barges did battle against the British barges that were harassing the area near Tangiers Island, Virginia. The American barges were forced to withdraw, sealing a British victory. December 15th, 1782. The American privateer Greyhound captured the British schooners Dolphin and Diamond. Prizes were sent to Little Egg Harbor, New Jersey to be sold off. December 20th, 1782. The Battle of the Delaware Capes. South Carolina privateers, along with 3 other American vessels, were attacked by 3 British frigates in the Delaware Capes. March 3rd, 1783. The British sloop Katy falls to the American privateer Lively off the coast of New Jersey. This is thought to be the final privateer battle during the Revolutionary War. April 6, 1783. The HMS Amphion arrives at the prison ship Jersey to determine the condition of the prisoners held there and to secure their releases. April 9th, 1783. Prisoners aboard the Jersey start being released. April 11th, 1783. Congress proclaims a formal cease to all hostilities. April 19th, 1783. The British sloops Rachel and Nancy become the last prizes of the war to be sold at auction in New Jersey. September 3rd, 1783. The Treaty of Paris is signed by the United States, Great Britain, France, Spain, and the Netherlands. January 14th, 1784. Congress officially ratifies the Treaty of Paris, thus officially ending the Revolutionary War. And now for a little bit extra. Today, it is on the Battle of the Delaware Bay, the first battle. There were 3, in fact, but we're going to focus on the first one right now. And that was on April 8th of 1782. I discussed this a little bit in part 5 towards the end. Captain Joshua Barney, master of the Hyder Alley, along with 2 other vessels, the General Green and the Charming Sally. They basically started off as a convoy escort. Their job was to convoy a fleet of merchantmen to the Capes, but on no account proceed to sea, it being the intention of the state simply to protect its own people within its own waters, and chiefly from the annoyance of the refugee boats. The small fleet of American ships had come to anchor just before entering the bay the evening before. And they had decided to wait for more favorable winds to cross the bay. They did spot, however, 3 British vessels lying in wait. They knew 2 were Her Majesty's vessels and 1 was a privateer. And those vessels were the HMS Quebec, commanded by a Captain Mason, the General Monk, commanded by Captain Rogers, and then the British privateer ship Fair American, which was a captured American privateer vessel. The British had attempted to flank the American convoy. However, due to the drafts of their vessels, that's the depth that they sit in the water, were rather great and deep, so they had to stick to the middle channels of the Delaware Bay, otherwise they would run aground. However, the General Green, either out of panic or other circumstance, had run aground, thus the crew escaping down to the shoals and then the shore and then off to avoid being captured by the British and either taken as prisoners or pressed into service. That's about the point where it became very clear to the British that the main ship in the battle to focus their efforts on was the Hyder Alley. Now, the Hyder Alley had a very young captain, Captain Barney. He was only about 22 years of age. They didn't know how many people were on board his crew, and they knew that the Hyder Alley had a small complement of Bucks County Marines who lacked experience on a ship, let alone battle at sea. Now, when the General Green had grounded herself, General Monk was occupied by taking what they could from that vessel. And then the Fair American had made for the remaining American ships which were trying to enter the Morris River to escape. As the Fair American had passed alongside the Hyder Alley, she opened up her broadsides, but the Hyder Alley did not return fire. Now, on the other side of the bay, the Charming Sally had run aground on the east side overfalls, and at the same time, the Fair American had run hard aground on the Egg Island Flats, leaving the General Monk to continue the pursuit on the Hyder Alley herself. However, as the General Monk passed the Charming Sally, it is rumored that she wantonly and infamously fired a volley of small arms into the stranded ship, wounding the chief mate and pilot. A short time later, the Monk had dropped a tender with 13 or 14 men, and they had taken possession of the prize. Once the Sally was refloated, they saw what was presumably the HMS Quebec coming into play in a battle about to take place between the Hyder Alley and the General Monk, but the Sally ended up running aground again, this time in the flats. The Hyder Alley was still on the stern of the convoy at this time, in Cape May Channel. They were watching the motions of the enemy with all the eagerness and anxiety natural to so important a trust. The only hope that Captain Barney had was to put his own ship in the middle of harm's way, giving the convoy time to escape, and that is exactly what he did. The Hyder Alley was outgunned and outmatched by the General Monk. The odds were definitely stacked against them, and Captain Barney knew whatever he had to do had to be decisive and quick in order for it to work. Captain Rogers of the General Monk, not really knowing much about what was on board the Hyder Alley or what their strengths were, he was definitely concerned that his cannonades would possibly be a handicap if the Hyder Alley had any long guns. Rogers determined that his best course of action was to close quickly on her quarter and attempt to board her. The Hyder Alley at that time had cut loose her tender and fired off a couple of bow chasers in desperation at the distance of about 100 meters, so it was a very, very inaccurate shot. As the General Monk approached the Hyder Alley, she did so without firing a shot, trying to save what they had. And once they got up on her, Rogers had quickly discovered that she was so full of men and so well provided with defenses against boarding that he had to switch tactics and use his cannonades anyway. Captain Barney had thought that the General Monk's impression that her unequal foe would not venture to make battle, and so the crew of the General Monk prematurely had started to congratulate themselves on winning the victory before they had even done so. And so he used that to his advantage. Rogers himself was in for a bit of a rude awakening if that was the case. For when the Monk had passed the Hyder Alley, gun ports were open and they had fired broadsides at about a pistol range. And this was a pivotal moment in the battle. Captain Barney had devised a ruse of war designed to deceive and confuse his enemy. He basically had told the helmsman to reverse the orders that he was about to give him. At this moment, the General Monk was closing in on their starboard quarter, and Captain Barney had shouted to his helmsman, "A hard aport to helm, do you want them to run aboard us?" Now Captain Rogers, hearing this command from his own vessel, ordered his own helm to port to keep abreast of the Hyder Alley and keep from raking them. And right then and there, on cue, Barney's helmsman did exactly what he was supposed to do, putting the ship to starboard instead of port and bringing the ship directly against the General Monk's bow so that they could not board her. Much to Barney's delight and Rogers' surprise, the two vessels now locked upon each other, as the Hyder Alley's jib boom was firmly locked into the General Monk's foremast. And that put Barney's ship, the Hyder Alley, in a raking position. So this was the Hyder Alley. Here's the General Monk. They're like this. Right then, Barney got smart and he gave the command to start lashing the two ships together so that the General Monk could not try to escape. Now, the General Monk wasn't completely helpless. They had to take their sternmost cannons and angle them up so that they could hit the bow as well as the stern of the Hyder Alley, but there wasn't much else that they could do. Meanwhile, the Hyder Alley could take her guns and rake the entire vessel bow to stern. This battle particularly was about as close to swashbuckling as you could get during the American Revolution, and there's documentation of it in Chaumet's book, Privateers of the American Revolution, which is mostly where this information came from. Now, Chaumet described it in his book as plowing down men, dismounting cannon, and slicing braces and rigging to ribbons. And while that was going on, Barney had commanded the sharpshooters from the Bucks County Marines to do what they do best. There's even a case of a breach of etiquette, not surprising, from one of the Marines, as the only documented case of trick shot that I've even come close to hearing about is mentioned. And that was, I'm going to read an excerpt from my paper and Chaumet's book. Moments later, a rifleman less acquainted with the rules of etiquette aboard a ship than he was with his own rifle and skill called down to Captain Barney from one of the fighting tops. He called down, "Captain, do you see that fellow with the white hat?" he shouted, and then fired his shot. Barney saw the result of the rifleman's skill as the man in the hat made a spring at least 3 feet from the deck and fall to rise no more. The rifleman was later recorded as saying, "Captain, that is the third fellow I've made hop." So, there it is, the trick shot. Now, musket fire had completely cleaned the decks of the General Monk from the hider alley. And below decks were strafed by cannonball. While this was going on, I mean, they were fighting for their lives. Barney did take fire. One shot was reportedly had come through his hat, scraping the crown of his head. Another had torn the skirt off of his frock. And Barney was actually standing aboard his binnacle, which is the con. He was perched atop his binnacle until a round shot splintered the structure under his feet, which made him fall. He got up, he was unhurt, and they kept firing. And the cannons aboard the hider alley were still firing. And the General Monk was pretty much silenced about 15 minutes into the fray, except for shots from their small arms, like pistols and rifles. Rogers had attempted to try and maneuver what he could of his vessel out from under the grip of the hider alley, but it did not work. Barney had saw the maneuver started, and he ordered his men to shoot at the sails, of which they did, and that right there was pretty much the end of it. Captain Rogers basically ordered the colors struck, and they lowered their red ensign, and that was the end of the battle. And thus ends the Battle of the Delaware Bay, the first one. There were 2 subsequent. One was actually involving the navies, the British Navy as well as the American Navy. And I believe, I'm not quite sure, I believe there was a French ship involved in that as well. We would have to look that up. The second, which was the Battle of the Delaware Capes, that actually took place on December 20th of 1782, which I brought up earlier in this episode. With that all being said, I want to thank you for watching the Privateer Timeline of the Revolutionary War series, and we look forward to seeing you on our next project. Thank you.
I wish I was a cabin boy aboard a man of war. Sam's got away aboard a man of war. Pretty work, brave boys, pretty work, I say. Sam's got away aboard a man of war. I wish I was a gunner aboard a man of war. Sam's got away aboard a man of war. Pretty work, brave boys, pretty work, I say. Sam's gone away aboard a man of war.